Can someone
Anyways,
give an argument for free will?
sure.
Yeah.
Free will? Non-existent.
Wait, AW, do you believe in free will?
I know free will is the case.
Can you prove that?
Not to a fool, but I
Is
can
it just
give
a
you an
presupposition?
image. Yeah, I
Okay,
can
what?
give you
Go
a
ahead.
set of arguments, yes.
Okay.
So, first I just want to lay out a few things. So, there's three issues involved in this. One of this is determinism, and by determinism I understand the issue concerns something being the cause or condition which makes some other thing the thing that it is.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. And I would just call this generally the structure of other determination. That something other than the thing makes the thing what it is.
Okay.
And then the issue of freedom and will need to be treated separately before we treat whether the will is free.
I mean, you can have will and be a determinist.
Not in the case that I'm going to explain it, but sure.
Wait, so you're explaining in a way that you cannot have will and be a determinist?
Nope. It will be determinate, but it won't be determined by another.
I don't follow.
That the will is determinate, but it is self-determining. It is not other determined, so the issues of determinism do not apply.
Okay, do you have a syllogism?
Sure, yeah. I have a set of syllogisms. So one of the things I want to set up is, the problem with determinism is not an absolute problem. So the reason for this is, one, all finite things begin and end in some manner, be it physical, quantitative, or qualitative. At the bounding limit of any thing is an other which determines their negative contact as a limit. So, things are determined as others by others. The universe is a domain of reality in which all things are. As nothing is not, it is not a determinant of anything. So there's nothing outside the universe. It is not efficacious. It is not a cause or condition of anything in the universe.
And you mean all possible universes, right?
Yeah. If there is a multiverse, then that multiverse in which all universes are is itself the universe and the top level reality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's shaky.
That's not shaky at all.
It is, because we're talking about free will.
Yeah.
We're talking about the universe. I mean, even if the universe doesn't have a cause or isn't determined, free will can be determined.
I haven't gotten there yet. I'm just talking about the top level universe. Okay. So we have there's a top level universe. Even if you say, well, there's an infinity of universes, there is some fact of being which determines that there must be an infinity of chains of causes on a flat level. But then this determining factor, which makes it so that all things need chains of causal chains, is itself not conditioned by another and is itself not caused.
Yeah.
So there can be no other to the universe, for all that is belongs in it. Things like possibility and actuality both are within the universe. They are part of the domain of being, just different types of beings. If there is a multiverse, it is really just the universe. So one of the conclusions of that is the universe is infinite because it has no other to limit it. It does not begin or end. That's kind of tangentially related. Another conclusion is the universe cannot be other determined because there is no other to the universe. So the issue of determinism does not apply to the determining universe itself. So if the universe is determinate, which it is, it must determine itself because there is no other to determine it to make it what it is.
By determined, you mean causally connected?
Determinate is not causally connected, but rather in the capacity of standing out to itself, in the way that one being is not another. Because if they were indifferent, then they would not really be one, they wouldn't be different beings, and two, they really wouldn't be a being at all.
So I don't understand. What does determined mean?
just being what it is, basically.
Yeah,
It is what it is.
so let's see. The doctrine of determinism must not be equivocated with the doctrine of determinateness. For something to be determinate is for it to be specified or qualified, which involves distinctions of otherness. But this is not necessarily provided by an other to a thing. So causality is a kind of determinateness, but it's not the only kind of determinateness.
Okay, so you're saying the universe determines itself?
Yeah.
And this gets us to where?
This starts getting us to the concept of freedom.
Okay.
So, there's another argument related to this that also you might, I don't know if you might have this objection that, well, what if the universe is just a brute fact? And sure, it's not determined by another, but it doesn't determine itself either.
Yeah,
it just is what it is.
Just a brute fact.
Well, so let's assume that the universe just is a brute fact, like foundational randomness. Well, a brute fact does not determine itself. So if a brute fact determined itself, it would not be a brute fact, because there would be an actual explanation from within itself as to what it is. So for a brute fact, there is some random or irrational origin that determines a brute fact. And so there is something else that necessarily has to determine it, because since it doesn't determine itself, it doesn't make itself what it is. The implication is, well, something else must be the cause or the determinant of what it is. And then we have the same issue with the universe as, well, okay, what if there's some irrational background, and it has that has an irrational background, and that has a further irrational background, a cause of a cause of a cause of a cause. Well, then there is some background which determines that all of these must have some kind of irrational cause and background, setting off a chain going infinitely, but then this itself cannot be caused by another, but rather must be the condition of itself, must be determining itself. So, brute facts cannot really be a thing. A brute fact is only an epistemic position of somebody who is ignorant as to what makes a thing what it is.
So the conclusion of all that the universe determines itself?
Yeah. So the universe cannot be a brute fact.
Okay.
So again, here I will define freedom a little bit. So determinism is often said as the direct opposite of freedom. Since determination is other determination, well, in this case, determinism is other determination, and its logical complement is self-determination, freedom is to be understood as self-determination. As the structure of determinism belongs to ontology, so does the structure of freedom. Therefore, the problem of freedom does not necessarily concern self-conscious subjects or their wills.
So you're saying it's a dichotomy between determined and self-determined?
Yeah. And what follows here is going to be a series of rebuttals of certain views of freedom that would say freedom is not self-determination.
Wait, so you're saying because the universe is self-determined, and that means everything inside is self-determined?
Not everything inside. But at least there's... so far, we've only established that there's only one object that qualifies for this, which is the universe as a whole.
Wait, why is self-determined? Why is that a dichotomy?
Well, it's either other-determined or it's self-determined. The universe has no other. There could be no other that determines it to be the kind of thing that it is. It is not a brute fact to itself, and so it is a domain of reality. The universe has to make itself as the universe the kind of thing that it is. Because there is no other place from which its determinacy, its qualifications, its distinctions can come from.
Okay.
So assume that freedom is absence of all limitation, that is, indeterminate or random.
Sure.
A limit determines the bounding beginning and end of one being to another. So in this case, with indeterminacy. Without a limit, the free being is not different to another being. If there were no limits at all, there would be no beings. Conclusion, the free being is not a being. This is absurd. Therefore, further conclusion is freedom must be determinate. It cannot be indeterminate.
Can you post that last part in the chat?
Yeah.
And wait, so you're saying that brute facts don't exist?
Yep.
From what I know, a brute fact is something that's just the most fundamental level of explanation. How can that not exist? What was the argument for that again?
That the issue of brute facts is that they're supposed to not have a further reason.
Yep.
But this belongs only to an epistemic problem. It is not actually a problem of ontology, because as far as ontology goes, as far as what it is to be at all, fundamental or otherwise, requires some kind of determinacy.
But I don't see that. I don't see how that argues there's no brute fact. We can just say that, so you're saying there's an infinite regress of explanations for something?
No, I'm saying that for anything that you would say is a brute fact, it only stands out as a fact to you because there is a background in which that is already a possible and actual thing. The fact that you don't make the step to what makes it possible and actual is only an epistemic limitation of the person making the claim. It is not a fact about the world itself.
Right. So by saying there's no brute fact, that means there's no fundamental thing that has no explanation to it?
Right. I would say that there's no such thing that will not have an explanation to it.
And the thing that explains it would also have to have an explanation, right?
Right. But in the case of the universe,
regress of explanations.
You don't get an infinite regress in here, because at least the universe is the kind of thing which makes itself the kind of thing that it is. So that in the universe's explanation of itself, we would have a virtuously circular explanation.
Wait, so why can't they? And what was the argument for the universe not being able to be a brute fact again?
That a brute fact takes a determinate thing, which has some determining background that has made it be the thing that it is. Because the thing about the brute fact is it doesn't make itself what it is. Because if it made itself what it is, then we would have an explanation as to what it is. But the whole point of a brute fact is that you can't explain it.
I don't see how that makes the universe not be able to be a brute fact.
The issue of a brute fact is that you can't explain it, not that it's foundational. So even if you have a foundation can be explained through what it founds. A ground is explained also through what it grounds, the grounded.
Yeah.
So a foundation is not an issue here. The issue is that you're making a claim that something is supposed to be a foundation and there can be no explanation to it. Well, if there's no explanation to it, you're not making an explanation from within it, because you're saying, well, the innerness of what it is not accessible to me, so I can make no explanation of that. And the external explanation, which would be some kind of further condition, I also cannot explain because I see no reason available to me for that. But that issue... Yeah, go ahead.
So you're saying that it's only unexplainable relative to us epistemologically?
Right. So it's an epistemological problem where the person who's making the claim about a brute fact is just failing to see what the actual conditions of the thing are. It's not a claim and cannot be a claim about the thing itself having no further conditions or explanation.
Wait, but I cannot see why something just can't exist as a brute fact. Or why can't something exist just as a brute fact?
Because again, so with a brute fact, I can't explain it. So I'm not going to give an internal explanation. But because I don't know that there is an internal explanation. So I can't say, well, the thing just is what it is because it makes itself the thing that it is. That wouldn't be a brute fact. That would be given some kind of internal, self-determining explanation. But I'm not saying that with a brute fact. But I'm also ignorant in that case of something else that would make it. So if I don't say that it has made itself, the implicit demand is, well, something else must have made it.
Wait, why must something else have made it?
Because it didn't make itself.
But what if it's just there?
Then it didn't make itself.
Yeah, it didn't make itself and nothing else made it.
So it didn't make itself and nothing else made it. Which is it?
It didn't make. Like, it can't be just there.
No, it can't be just there. Because if you say it's just there, okay, it didn't make itself, so something else must have made it. Well, if something else didn't make it, then it made itself. Which is it? It is a true dichotomy.
But I don't see the dichotomy. I would say it's the dichotomy that it didn't make itself. Or it didn't make itself. Or it didn't make itself or something else made itself. So everything has to be made, is what you're saying?
Well, either a thing makes itself be what it is, or it's made by another to be what it is.
No, it's either made by itself or it's not made by itself. Not that it's made by itself or something else made it.
If it's not made by itself, the implication is necessarily there is some other that has made it. That's it. When you say, well, what if it just is what it is, then you're just being epistemically like limited because you refuse to go through with the logic. The logic demands that if a thing didn't make itself, then clearly it was made by another.
Wait, no. I see the dichotomy between if something it either made itself or it didn't make itself. I see that dichotomy. I don't see that.
What does it mean to not make itself? What is the implication?
It just means it didn't make itself.
Okay, no, there is a further implication. What is it?
I don't see what that further implication
there is a specific further implication. If it doesn't make itself, then it didn't make itself, which means that if it's not within itself, it's outside it.
I'm not trying to be.
No, I'm not saying that you're being bad faith. I understand why you have an issue with this.
I just don't necessarily see that I don't see the dichotomy between it either makes itself or something else made it. I see the dichotomy between either makes itself or didn't make itself, but I don't see how the implication that something else made it necessarily follows.
So if it didn't make itself, how is it there?
We can just say that it just is.
Okay, then it just is. What is the being which just is, that just is all these things?
God.
Wait, what do you mean just is all these things?
Okay, there's a domain of being, right?
But domain of being, do you mean just something is?
Yeah, the fact of isness. That anything that is will be.
Okay.
So the domain of non-being is not efficacious. It isn't. So, we will appeal to it no domain of non-being for some cause, condition, or determining power. So if there's a finite thing which is, since it is not itself the domain of being, we can say, well, something about the domain of being has made this thing be what it is. So no finite thing is going to be a brute fact, which I don't think you're saying.
Finite. What if it's not?
Yeah,
finite?
So for the domain of being, the domain of being is. Now, it isn't just merely an abstraction. We are ourselves right now in the domain of being, talking about the domain of being. So the domain of being is also a concrete reality for us.
So you're saying the domain of being isn't brute fact?
Yeah, in this case, the domain of being would not be a brute fact. There's more to the domain of being that can be said about it and can be explicated about it than merely that it is.
Well, I thought for brute fact it has to be explained by something more fundamental, not just explained.
Yes, yeah, so it would be anything that would be an explanation of a thing would necessarily have to be more fundamental than it, as being a causal condition for what it is.
How can you fundamentally explain the domain of being?
Well, by making it intelligible. But the whole point is the domain of being clearly makes itself be what it is. There is no other domain which makes it be because it is what is. But there's something.
I still don't see I still don't see, that if something didn't make itself, it necessarily follows that something else has to have made it. I don't see why it just can't be it there.
Because if it is there, in this case, it's domain of being. What made the domain of being? The domain of being. Now, the fact that I don't know how the domain of being has made itself does not mean that domain of being has no structures to be made intelligible as to how it makes itself be the kind of thing that it is.
They're saying we can fundamentally explain the domain of being further?
I'm saying that
other more fundamental.
that anything that would
concepts.
claim to be an understanding of the domain of being has to, by rational force, demand that there is a further explanation than just saying, well, it just is. Because it just is, well, yeah, I can tell it is a domain of being. But why is it the specific domain of being that we experience? Because we're not talking about some abstraction here. We're talking about a concrete domain of being.
Wait, do you consider an abstraction like, because this is how we talk about God, like if you're a Christian, right? Like God just is, and he always was and will be.
I think here he would say that
So
God explains itself.
Yeah, I would say God is self-determining and makes himself. And this would go. This would accord with
okay.
Scripture, I think.
Well, I don't know because I've always actually heard Amon's viewpoint on God. I never heard that like, oh, he makes himself. I just always heard that he just was and
I don't think
is.
it's make. I think it's
And will
explain.
Well, these are
what?
just different turns of phrases. Making, determining. I'm not using it in a very technical sense.
Wait, so can you technically define what it means to explain something?
To give rational structure to it.
Yeah, rational structure. Okay, and you're saying the domain of being explains itself, right?
Yeah. Because it gives itself structure. It gives its own self-determining. Because if it didn't, there would be nothing.
Wait, wouldn't that still make it a brute fact? Because I thought for brute fact it has to be explained by something. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but a brute fact is something that cannot be explained by something more fundamental to it, or more foundational to it, right?
Yes, but the reason it's called a brute fact is because that thing has no further reason that I can see. And I can't give you an explanation as to what it really is in itself. So I just have to accept that it is what it is, even though I can't tell you actually what it is.
Well, it's not that. It's that it has to be. It cannot be explained by something more fundamental than it.
Yeah, but the reason you say that it cannot be explained by a further, more fundamental thing is because you can't find a further rational structure within it.
Yes. So if we say the domain of being explains the domain of being, then we're not explaining it by something. We're not explaining the domain being by something more fundamental than it. We're explaining the domain being by the domain of being, which means you're not explaining it by something more fundamental than it, which means it would be a brute fact, right?
Not in this case, because you're not going to appeal to the domain of being for saying what the domain of being is. You're not going to be like, oh, it is what it is because it is what it is. That would tell us nothing. But if I tell you, look, the domain of being is such that it is self-determining, that it has a negative self-relationship in which one aspect of being can be divided from another in a mutual non-being, and that allows things to have a structure of existence such that they can stand out from each other as separate, distinct things by being through not being another. I have not appealed to the domain of being yet again, and as a matter of fact, I have revealed in that the domain of being as just the beginning point is not all there is to be talked about, such that once we make shifts like that, I'm starting to explain the domain of being by existence, for example, and I can explain existence by something, and then by finitude and all these other things.
Yeah, we don't do the domain of being. We can just say, like, for example, if we have A that can only explain itself via A, would you say that's a brute fact?
Yeah, you're just basically saying A is A.
Yeah, no, A can only explain itself through A.
Yeah, but if what is in A is more than the immediacy of A, then you have a further explanation. And now if you just want to maintain some kind of linguistic continuity and just say, I'm still talking about some kind of like further internal predicates of A, it makes no difference because the initial abstraction, the initial immediacy of A, and the ending concrete concept of A and the understanding of A are not actually going to be the same. So that domain of being at the end and the domain of being, as I understand at the beginning, are not actually going to be the same. So an explanation
I-
has been made, and it has been made through a further factor than the initial ones.
I just don't see the contradiction in something existing that can only explain itself via itself.
Okay, if that's what you mean by brute fact, then I guess we're just in agreement. But what I understood by brute fact is not only is it fundamental and not reducible to anything else, not explainable by anything else, it is not explainable in itself. I can't give a further explanation of what it is. Because if I could, there would be something more to appeal. It'd be like, it used to be believed, oh, you can't break down atoms any further. Well, we found out, no, they're subatomic particles. They're electrons, protons, neutrons. And then people are like, well, you can't break those down. Well, no, apparently we can break those down into, quarks and whatnot.
Well, I don't think it would be like that. It would be like, for example, let's say we have a law that for now we think just is. We can explain how the law works. Like we can explain the law, but we can't explain the law with something more fundamental than the law. Like we can explain how quarks work. We just can't explain it with something more fundamental than quarks.
So, like, the law is a good example. When you say I explain the law, you say, well, gravity. Gravity, equals, I think it's like what 1 over r squared or something.
I
Don't
know.
quote me
I
on
mean, we can
that.
explain gravity. Yeah, we can explain gravity.
Yeah. So that expansion of the equation is an explanation, yes, but it is not an explanation of a self-determination. It's an explanation by analyzing the contents within it, so that the thing that I began with, the mere immediate phenomenon of gravity, is now given a further content, which is not a return to the same thing. Because when I just say, well, gravity is gravity, I haven't said anything. And I have indeed just appealed it. And if I just said gravity is gravity, I can't say anything more. It's a brute fact. Look, man, don't ask me further explanations. Well, if I tell you gravity is 1 over r squared, I have made a further explanation. And I have actually made some kind of movement in which I'm appealing to a further determination than mere gravity's presence itself. But gravity is not a self-explaining thing. The universe, however, reality being, has to explain itself, because there is no other domain that you can appeal to that from which a determination for its being or its explanation would come from. But if you are going to see, well, it is a brute fact insofar as ultimately it will only have to appeal to itself, but I don't leave it as just like, well, it is what it is, then I guess yeah, we agree. And then what I'm talking about with brute facts does not attack what you're talking about with brute facts.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would agree with you then. I would agree that the universe can only explain itself through the universe. Or like it can only explain itself through itself.
Sure,
or only explain itself, okay.
Sure. I pasted the thing on the side chat about the argument of freedom being determinate.
Right.
I'm just going over it right now.
Yeah. I mean, just, the whole argument starts with an assumption I don't agree with it. And the definition of limit is
Well, what's your disagreement with that?
well, so let me just look at it. So you started with an assumption that says that freedom is absence of all limitation, i.e., indeterminate. So basically, what I'm saying is I disagree with that assumption. I think freedom can be other things, such as, let's say, the opportunity or the choice to do something, right?
Oh, we haven't gotten there. That's a subjective thing. I'm still talking about mere ontology.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, we did stop here, but it's just an assumption that. But I mean, you could always just go on and finish.
No, yeah, and the reason it starts with assumption is because this is a reductio ad absurdum.
Yeah, I'm not saying I'm not criticizing
Yeah, so the whole point of that argument beginning that way is I want to disprove that by showing how ridiculous it is.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, so the conclusion of free being is not a being, wouldn't that just mean that free beings can't exist?
If you're going to accept irrational definitions, sure. But I like to talk about reality. I don't like to talk about nonsense.
Wait, what do you mean by rational? Like, which definitions?
So anybody who would define freedom as freedom from all limitations, pure negative freedom.
Wait, you said freedom is freedom from all limitations?
Yeah, absence of all limitation. And this is a common assumption people have. A lot of people say, like, oh, what it is to be free is just to not be limited.
Do you mean like the ontology of free, or like in general if a person is free?
Ontology of freedom, which applies to people, but not necessarily.
Yeah, because someone can like be free, but not like if we believe free will exists, for example, they still wouldn't be absent of all limitations.
Right. So the whole point of this argument is just to reduce ad absurdum of this idea that freedom and indeterminacy go together. They actually don't. So makes sense? I mean,
Give me 1 second. Wait, can you explain the third line? Without a limit, the free being is no different than any other being?
yeah, a limit is the point at which, you have one being in a negative contact with another being. At its limit, it stops and the other being begins. At the other being's limit, it stops and the other being begins. If you don't have that mutual separation, both beings just melt back together. And if you have no limitations of any kind, then you just have an indeterminate blob in which no beings stand out as being anything.
Okay, so you're saying if freedom is indeterminate, then there would be only one being?
There would not even be one being. There would be no distinctions to stand out to anyone for there to even be a one. There would be nothing.
And what do you mean by a limit in terms of bounding between the end of one being to another?
That the limit is one being ends, another being begins.
Wait, why doesn't it, by being you mean like a mind, right?
No, any being. It could be a physical body. If matter was not separated by space, you wouldn't have different bodies. As a matter of fact, you wouldn't even have matter. Matter is only extended through space.
Oh, okay. Wait, so it is just going to eventually go towards we have free will, but it's determined?
Yeah, if we have free will, but it's determinate.
Wait, how would that align with determinism? I mean, how would that align with Wait, what would you define free will to be? I thought we define it by
Self-determination.
And is it okay? Wait, can you post the next part of the syllogism?
Yeah, let me paste it. So this one goes along with that one. So freedom as determinate and indeterminate. So freedom is deterministic in that what is free is determinately what it is and proceeds consequently from what it is to what it should be by determining itself and giving specific distinctions of existence. Freedom is indeterministic in that as a whole the determinacy of a free being is not conceivable under the concept of determinacy which could be given by another. And if there is a further determination, it can only come from the being itself. Conclusion, in relation to itself, freedom is determinate. In relation to another, freedom is indeterminate.
Wait, where does freedom need to be determined by itself? Where did that come in?
There is no other to determine it. So insofar as it has distinctions in that it is a specific being among other beings, it is the source of the distinctions themselves rather than another being being the source.
Wait, then why can't something else determine something's freedom? Like one being determine another being's freedom?
Because freedom belongs to the inner part of a being, that it's qualitative being what it is. That insofar as there is a free being, it will make itself what it is. It will not be made what it is by another. It's not that it can't interact with another, but the interactions will not be an interaction of a kind upon a kind, such that one kind will make another kind be the kind that it is.
Wait, so if I would go about my day in a way that like in the same way and I couldn't make a choice, like it would be determined, but it would be determined by other factors. Would that still count as having free will?
No.
Okay. So I don't see how this would remove that.
No, we're getting there. So this is
Okay,
just
so
laying out that freedom is not absolutely indeterminate, but it is indeterminate in the fact that it's not going to be determined by another in relation to other things. It is indeterminate, but in relationship to itself, within itself, it does have determinations, but those don't come from another, they come from itself.
wait, and where here does it say that freedom can only be determined by itself?
That was an earlier argument.
The earlier argument said it was determined, but
Yeah, the earlier argument was that determinism cannot be absolute. The universe is self-determining, so we're still at the level of just speaking of the generality of the universe as determining itself. And if you remember, here
you define.
I'll copy you the thing about determination. So for something to be determinate is for it to be specified or qualified, which involves otherness, but is not necessarily provided by an other to a thing. So the universe definitely has distinctions, it has specifications, qualifications. It is determinate, so these determinations cannot come from another, therefore they must be self-determinations of the universe itself.
And if it's self-determination, it can't be deterministic, is what you're saying? Or like it's free in that sense?
Yeah, because they come from it rather than from another.
Okay. But that just gets you to the universe being having like being in that sense free. I don't see how that would get to something that doesn't have to be explained by itself being free.
That's why I'm like building up to it, because like if I just went like, oh well, we just have free will and we have the structures, like obviously somebody would be asking for like further reasons. So I'm, instead of doing a backwards set of arguments in which I start from like, oh well, we have free will, and like I have to walk it backwards to like lead you back to some fundamental ontology. I'm starting with the ontology and I'm leading you to how that makes sense of like freedom as we normally talk about it.
Wait, so I don't see how in the freedom as determinate and indeterminate. I can see that freedom must be determined, but I don't see why it has to be determined by itself.
Well, because there is no other. Like in the universe, we've already established there is no other to the universe that makes it be what it is.
Well, is this still talking about just the universe?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. That's what's next up from here.
So let's see. These couple of arguments are related. Okay, these are two arguments. And these concern what the structures of freedom will start to look like. So that, rather than just like merely just saying, well, the universe is self-determining, there is actually a certain form that self-determination has. So the universe is one, there is no other to it. The universe is self-determining because there is no other that determines it and makes it what it is. Determinacy within the universe, be it qualitative or quantitative, involves the existence, standing out, of one being from another, where each is the non-being of the other. The universe is self-related, because these elements of it are not others to it. They are parts of the universe and belong to its domain. They are beings within being, and to that extent are being. Relation involves relata, a plurality. Conclusion, the universe is one that is many. So the structure of freedom will involve beings that as one are a plurality within themselves, which unify again into the one.
So this is just saying that there's things inside the universe?
Yeah, that this is one of the determinate forms of freedom, of self-determination, that when a thing is self-determined, it will have the form of a one, which has a plurality of itself within it, which as a plurality is unified within it again.
So by one that is many, you just mean that there's stuff inside the universe that is self-determined?
Yeah, that the structure of the universe's self-determination is a one that is many, in which those parts are clearly not others to it. They are coming from the universe's own essence, let's say. They share the same essence. And they are within its own domain. They're not outside it in some other domain. There's only a domain of being. So whatever the universe is, and whatever it is to be a universe, it is a unity which somehow produces particulars, a plurality within itself, which still remain within itself, and are distinct, yet not essentially different from it.
Okay.
All right, in the next argument, the ontology of freedom, self-individuation. So to be one is to be unified, that is a universal. A unity is a unity of plurality or distinctions. A plurality is subsumed under a unity in which they are distinguished, that is, particulars. A particularity in relation to another particularity is negatively united as an individual. Conclusion, the universal being necessarily becomes individual.
And is this the end of it?
Yeah, that's not the end of the arguments. It's just two sub-arguments.
What do you mean by individual again? You mean
singular. Just a singular entity. You may have two apples. They're particular apples, but the individuality apples is there's this apple and there's that apple. That's what makes them individuals. They're clearly not each other.
Yeah, the first part is saying there are things exist within the universe. The second part is saying these things are individuals.
Yeah, individuations of the universe itself, necessarily.
Okay.
And this one is probably going to be one of the harder ones to explain. So the fact that there are parts in the universe which are unified in it is itself not a brute fact. There is a reasoning to it.
Which is the universe, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is trying to explain what this reasoning is. So the universal, the unity, is distinct from the particular, and it is itself not the unifier of itself and particular.
Wait, give me a second.
So you have the unity, the whole of the universe. You have the parts in the universe. The whole and the parts are not immediately identical. There's a clear distinction between universal and particular.
Okay. Yeah. And the universe is particular. Particular is indifferent to the universal and unified.
So that could probably be a better phrase. The particular is indifferent to the universal and unifying the particular and universal under itself. So the universal is a particular along with the particular, and therefore they're both unified under the category of particularity itself. So the particular is actually universal because it is the unity of the particular and universal in this case.
And by universally, you mean
unity.
It's like oneness, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's unity.
The universe is. And by particular, you mean it is a part of?
Yeah.
So what do you mean by the unity is a part of? Like the universal is particular.
Which one are you talking about?
The second line.
Second line?
Yeah, the oneness is distinct from the particular, and it is itself. Wait, why is the universal distinct from the particular?
Because the whole of the unity is a different structure than the parts within that unity. So the structure of total unity and the structure of particular unity are not the same unity. And the whole distinction of the universal is it's supposed to be the one. But if the whole is not absolutely the one which would explain the particulars, but is itself a distinction against the particulars, then it is a particular.
So
an analogy would be like in your own experience, there's the existence of your whole body, which has its own level of operations as a whole, which are distinct from these particular operations of your skin cells and your organs and your bones. So there's there's a quality distinct to the whole, which does not belong to the parts, and there's a quality distinct to the parts that does not belong to the whole.
But how about for something fundamental? Like let's say theoretically, let's imagine there's nothing beyond the quark. But then wouldn't there be no difference between the universal and the particular?
Well, if the whole universe was nothing but quarks, there's clearly separate quarks. There are particular quarks and individual quarks. There's not just a universal quark.
Wait, what do you mean? Yeah, different quarks, but to explain a singular quark, would it be how would you make that distinction?
So there's something about quarks qualitatively that makes them be the kind of thing that they are, whatever they may be. Yeah, and that would be its own essence of whatever.
And how is that different from the particular?
That, whatever that is, also involves the distinguishing of different quarks from each other, separated by space or whatever you may have that keeps one body from another, or keeps one energy from another, whatever way you want to think about it. So there's not just merely an abstract unity. There is a unity of parts. If there were no parts, there would be nothing to unify. There would be no unity.
Okay. And by universally, you mean just like everything, right?
Yeah. Just general unity.
Wait, what do you mean by unity?
Yeah, just general unity.
Yeah, what do you mean by unity? Like it's like oneness?
Just unity. Because it's not an abstract oneness of like reducing everything to, it's just one. No, it's a unity of differences. Because you can't have a unity if you don't have parts that are unified.
Okay, so the unity is particular in itself, not the unifier of itself. And the universe is particular?
Right. The unity of the universe is itself particular as distinct from the parts within the universe.
What if we just call the universe everything? Like we say the parts are part of the universe.
Well, you can say that, but then the parts and the whole are clearly not the same. Your own language specifies that they are not the same.
What if you're this is a reach. What if you're a mereological nihilist?
Well, then you're just pretending to be stupid. But I don't talk to stupid people. people can be wrong.
Yeah. Would that hypothetically remove, like, would that work if someone said that?
No, because a mereological nihilist, if somebody says, "Well, there are no parts," then why are you talking to me?
No,
Why are
there
you
are no
living a
whole
life? Like, you can say things, but the way you live your life and the way you exist is completely opposite to what you're saying. So I can't take someone like that seriously.
But I mean, like, for this specific syllogism.
Well, no, I'm saying that, like, in the case that somebody says there are no parts, the very enunciation of that
You mean no
is
holes,
the
right?
statement of a. Were you saying that? I thought you said mereological nihilist, which is denial of parts. Or did you mean nominalist, which is denial of wholes?
Yeah. I'm dumb. I thought mereological nihilist was that there's just like fundamentals that, like, the parts are there, but they don't make holes.
Yeah,
Or
that's
is
called
everything whole?
nominalism.
Okay, yeah. Well, wait. So okay. And you said you just want to talk to someone who says that?
Yeah. Someone like that is also stupid because, well, there are parts. How are you relating to them? You're saying there are no unities. Well, one, there's a unity of your mind. You can tell the different experiences you have, which are clearly not each other, and yet they're unified. There's a one single domain of unity in your own experience where that's happening. So your own experience and your own enunciation is a performative contradiction against what you're saying. And you cannot take someone like that seriously. Not only because, well, it's a performative contradiction, but it's a semantic contradiction as well. If there is no domain of unity, it's like saying, well, there's different bodies, but there's no space that actually separates the bodies. Then how are there different bodies? Well, there can't be.
You would just say that the universe is not distinct from the particular, right? If you're a mereological nihilist.
I'm sorry, what?
If you're a mereological nihilist, wouldn't you just say the universal is distinct from the particular?
Yeah, because they would just deny there's no distinctions, there are no parts. But they can say that, and yet the fact of them saying it is a performative contradiction.
Why is that again?
Because they're a part telling another part that parts aren't real.
But they just wouldn't presuppose that they're a part, right?
Well, the fact that they're telling you is a performance of partedness.
Why is that?
So, the fact that they tell you they are actually engaging in being a part, the fact that I go and tell you, look, parts aren't real, man. I may say that, and yet everything that I'm doing is literally the opposite.
I don't really get that, but we can just move on because that's kind of relevant. So the particular is indifferent to the universal.
So where were we?
3. Particular.
So 3. The particular is indifferent to the universal, and unifying the particular and universal under itself. So since both the universal falls down into the particular along with the particular. But now what do they share? What is their unity? That they're both particulars. So the particular is universal.
Okay. And then
So the universal and particular are distinct from each other, despite both being both particular and universal.
Okay.
So, sure, they're both particulars, they're both universal, but yet they're not each other. How's that possible? Because you have the universal particular and the particular universal, and that's their individuality. It's the difference between, having two apples, which are particulars, and then I specify this apple and that apple, and that's their individuality.
Okay.
So universal and particular are individuals in relation to each other.
Okay.
So, yeah. And then the individual is what they share. It's their unity of the particular of universal. So the individual is universal.
Yes. Conclusion: universal, particular, and individual all equally are determined as each other. The individual is universal over the others, and particular in relation to others. The particular is universal over the others. and individual in relation to others. Universal is particular and individual. Universal, particular, and individual mutually determined and generate others out of themselves. And generate themselves as conclusion as a determining process. And is this the end of it?
Yeah, and so this is the structure of a self-making being.
Universal, particular, individual. What does that mean that not, like, even if something isn't sentient, it's self-determining?
No, actually, this provides a structure of like why we can then recognize certain beings to engage in this. Not only just certain beings, all beings that are true beings will be instances of this to more or less extent. So that
And by
to be, so that to be is to be free. Because if you're not free, you're not even a real object. Because if you don't make yourself, you are not a thing that makes itself and keeps itself together. Like the atom has powers within it and forces which maintain it from within to be the kind of thing that it is. It's not like a pile of dirt, which just willy-nilly happens to be there because different crystals and minerals, happen to be piled together, but they have no inherent bond to each other. Real objects make themselves. That's what makes them objective. In a metaphorical way of the way that we use the word objecting. I say I object to that thing you said. I object to them doing this, that. To be an object is metaphorically like that, where a thing resists, it objects something else making it what it would make it.
Okay. And what's the distinction between a pile of dirt and the atoms again?
That the pile of dirt, it doesn't make itself. The pile of dirt is just different things. The actual objects in a pile of dirt is not the pile. The actual object is the crystals and the grains of sand, the minerals. Those have some kind of chemical and atomic structures which through their own nature bind themselves together. If you put hydrogen and oxygen together, they will by their own nature make themselves into water.
Okay, and the universe and the atom makes itself because it's just a bond?
Yeah, it has its own nature, whatever it may be, nuclear forces, what have you, which bind those aspects of matter in that way. And it's not some other thing that does that. And if some other thing tries to come into contact with the hydrogen and tries to make it be other than it is, the hydrogen has its own nature by which it resists, it objects something else determining it as a kind that it is.
And you just mean forces, right?
Yeah, in this case it would be forces in the atom.
But the atom doesn't determine those. The forces are separate from the atom, right?
No. The atom is indeed the self coming together of these forces to bind as an atom.
Yeah, but the atom doesn't explain the forces.
No, in this case it would. That insofar as atoms are possible and actual, it is the natures of these objects as atomic powers that bring themselves together into atoms.
Yeah, but it doesn't explain the existence of the forces.
In this kind of argument, I will see to you that I'm not going to explain it. But there is a philosophy which has a view, the one that I follow, which will say actually yes, the atom would explain the forces themselves.
So the forces aren't independent from the atom?
Nope, not in this case. There is no such thing as forces without material bodies.
I'm talking about that specific atom. No, wait. You think forces are dependent on material bodies?
Yeah, forces are effects or activities of material bodies. They are not independent beings of their own.
Wait, real quick, would you consider space-time material?
Yes.
Why?
Because insofar as space is extended, it is outside of itself, and part of what it is to be outside of itself is to be temporalized. Time is basically a space which is of a different kind. Space as such, like immediate space, is not temporalized, but There's a temporalization of space. We live in it.
Well,
in
we don't live
which
in
there is a
temporal.
nature which makes space, the same nature which makes space and determines space to be what it is, the universe, is also the same nature which determines itself to appear in the domain of time, which relates also to space, and then
Well,
unifies with space.
I was under the impression time and space are independent.
No, not in my view. As a matter of fact, well, in the regular view, they aren't independent either. You have space-time with relativity.
Yeah, but they're not dependent on each other though. They're two individual things that come together, but they're not like it's there's two individual things. They're two different dimensions. They aren't like together. Different spaces together. For example, if you have a fourth dimension, you have to have a fourth orthogonal component to the spatial dimension. But the dimensions of time are separate from space.
Sure. It's a different domain, but it's the same way in which the form of matter and the content of matter are not the same, and yet they are going to be inherently tied. And I'm just saying this right now. I'm not gonna prove it to you because I want to finish this argument.
Yeah.
But there can be an explanation provided as to why I say that time and space are inherently connected and mutually determining.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You don't have to explain it, but what position is it that holds that?
Hegelianism.
I'm sorry.
It's from a philosophy of Hegel's philosophy of nature.
Hey, can you type that inside the chat? Okay. All right, and sure. And what after this? Or this just ended, right?
Nope. So we have the ontology of self-generation. Like, this is how the one necessarily becomes many, and how the many, in being many individuals, have a capacity to themselves be universals. So all real individuals are basically a microcosm of the macrocosm. So the universe is free, therefore a real individual also must, to some extent, be actually free, because it must be self-determining.
Okay.
Okay.
But it's like, are there any other syllogisms after this?
Yep. And so now we move on to the will. So this is a refutation of a common view of the will. Suppose that to will is to choose between desires via desires. So if the will has no inherent desire of its own, then it is determined by the strongest desire. If the strongest desire determines the will, then there is no choice and there is no will. There is such a thing as a will. Conclusion: the will is not reducible to external desires and their relative strengths. Another conclusion: the will has a desire which is uniquely its own and by which it chooses objects and other desires present in consciousness.
Desires. Well, I don't see it. No. The first one, the suppose the will is to choose between desires via desires. I don't think you choose desires via desires. I think you just have a set of desires and you choose the strongest one.
Right, but how is that a choice? So that just means that your will is basically an open gate in which, like, the stronger makes it there first, opens the gate and shuts it, and the deal is done. That is not what we mean by a choice. That is, in fact, not a choice at all.
Yeah, if the will has no inherent desire of its own, then it's determined by the strong desire. If the strong desires are determined as a will, then there is no choice.
Because I agree with you. Yes, part of what we mean about a will is we stand back from desires and we choose. So we clearly don't choose based on the immediate strength of desires. So the factor cannot be merely the strength of desires in consciousness. There must be something else. And of course, the impetus of action is desires. So there must be something that the will desires, because otherwise we wouldn't do anything, we wouldn't act. So what is that desire that is different from like the usual desires that we have?
Well, for the first premise, those of the will is to choose. Does the will do the act of choosing?
Yeah, that's usually what we think.
But to choose implies it's a choice, right?
Right.
But I would say the will doesn't have a choice.
Right. So that's why I say, like, suppose that it is, and this is only an argument against someone who would say this. You know, it's
Would
just
say
like
what?
they would say that the will is the choosing between desires via desires.
But the first thing is the will is not reducible to desires. I think
To external desires.
external desires.
Yeah.
Okay. Those are the ones choose to desires for desires. The will is no inherent desires for those that is determined by the strong desire. It's the strongest desire determines the will. Well, does the strongest desire determine the will, or does the will determine the strongest desire?
The strongest desire determines the will in this case. Because all the will is, it's an open gate for like whichever desire is strongest. And, you know, I obviously desire what I desire most, so I will do what I desire most. But that's not a choice. You know, in that case, like, you know, that's why we have the name drives. One is driven, one is pushed along or pulled along.
Okay. The strongest desire determines the will. There is no choice, and there is no will.
Yeah, because to will is to choose. If you don't have choice, then like we're not talking about the will.
That's free will. If you can
No,
say
it's not even about free will. Like in this case, it's just to choose. Because you can choose in a determinate sense, being determined, but in this case, there is no choice happening, because in order to say the will chooses, it must have its own desire, unique to itself, by which it chooses others and sift. It's like a sift. Here, the will is not a sift. Here, the will is just an open gate. Whichever like desire strongest comes in first and carries it along.
Oh, sure. And what's the Is there another solution?
Yeah, I posted the next one.
Okay. The will is not merely choice.
Suppose that the will is merely a faculty of choosing. To choose is to choose via a determining measure. If the will has no inherent determining measure, but the determining measure is outside it, then the will cannot be said to choose, but is simply automatically determined by the external determining measure. The will engages in choosing. Conclusion, the will has an internal determining measure for what it chooses. Because people do talk about this quite a lot, right? It is actually one of the most common, if not like the most common of all concepts of the will. That to will is just to choose, but why do you choose? If you have no reason to choose, how in the hell can you be making a choice?
Well, okay. So is this going to get down to that act of choosing the desire is free will? Or
yes,
is there like more?
yes, it will come to the point where like you can choose your own desires.
But what if the desires are, but you're gonna always choose this, but you're always going to choose the strongest one, right?
Mm-hmm. Not the immediately strongest one, but there must be a strongest one. And that strongest one has to be the one inherent to the will itself.
Well, so then, would you be free then if the one you're choosing is going to be the strongest one?
Not the strongest one. Again, it's not the strongest one immediately. It's the strongest one concerning what belongs to the will itself. So remember, like, freedom is self-determination. So whatever belongs to me and comes from me in this case it would be belongs to the will and comes from the will, would just be the will's self-determination.
Okay, so it's that the person determines a will, right? And then from that, the will chooses the strongest desire, and because we determine the will is free.
In this case, the will choosing its strongest desire is to choose its own inherent desire, like the desire unique to itself over any immediate desire. And through that desire, only as that being the ultimate end, are the other desires chosen.
Okay, so you mean like whenever we say the strongest desire is relative to something? That's
Mm-hmm.
what it's
So in this case, the will has its own unique desire. We haven't yet gotten to what it is. But suppose you have here like you want either pizza or a salad, and immediately you want the pizza a lot more. But there's a third factor now: the will's own desire, unique to itself. It's it's a desire that comes from itself. It's not given from outside because it's part of its own nature. In this case, let's say that desire is health, and you value health over the immediacy of satisfaction because health in the long run is more satisfaction.
Well, I don't think that. No, I'll just say you have your desire, like the strongest desire in this case, to be healthy, for health. For example, if like theoretically the desire to eat the pizza because or like a food had like 100-fold better like taste, that would be stronger, and you choose that one.
No, because in this case, this is why I said like there has to be a distinction between something inherent to the will, which is not going to be put on an equal ground with all the other things. Because you may immediately, right now, actually want and strongly feel you want that pizza. But for health reasons, despite the fact that you would gain a lot more pleasure by engaging right now in eating the pizza, more satisfaction, you're going to choose the healthy option.
Well, you wouldn't gain more pleasure in the long run. You would gain more pleasure in being healthier.
Right. And this involves a factor of thinking, which is going to come up in a further argument in which the will is not merely a being driven by desires in abstraction, like, hunger, sex, all these other things. It is not just these immediate desires. There's a mediating desire. The unique desire of the will is actually rationality, self-knowing. But we'll get to that. So, like, let's just continue.
Okay. Well, I'll just say one thing. From these examples you're giving, it's like, from what I see, is that the will is thinking to choose what gives it the most pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I won't say that's wrong, but I would say there's more to be said about what that actually is.
Okay, yeah, what's just next one?
So this is like for people, there was a guy here earlier who said like, oh, you need randomness to have free will. This is against people who say that.
Yeah, I don't think that we can just move on.
All right, so we can skip that.
Yeah, we've been here for like a long time.
So here's the next one.
Is there a website where we got this, or just like your notes?
These are mine.
Okay.
But it's a Word document. Well, it's a Google Docs. I can link it to you if you want.
Yeah, I would like that. I probably won't be able to debunk this right now in this sitting. It'll probably take a couple hours.
You won't be able to debunk it at all.
You think so?
Yes, I think so. Because I can debunk your debunking. There's an ultimate skepticism that the philosophy of Hegel has. Which,
Okay,
yes, you can give reasons to doubt what I'm saying, but I have a doubt that I can put as a wedge into anything that you may counter, not to specifically defend this, but to bring to the ground everything you could possibly claim to know, such that philosophy no longer looks like these kinds of discourses. It no longer looks at these kind of formal arguments.
You mean like precepts?
Or no, not in a precept way. Actually, it's anti-precept. It's the drive to get you to stop presupposing absolutely everything, including the ultimate presupposition, which is the presupposition of reason itself.
Okay, so will is a mode of God. Oh, yeah, you have a doxis for all of it.
Yeah.
So I can on that.
Okay, sure. I'll just link that.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you want to make a critique of this, I will welcome it, and you can send it to me, or we can talk about it some other time.
Yeah, I'm going to add you. But oh, you're hold on.
Friends. Okay, yeah, I got it.
Yeah, I won't be able to. Oh, you're a deontologist?
Yes, but no.
Can you explain that?
If I,
Or
when you say deontologist, I would call my position actually moral ontology, that you cannot speak about morality without establishing what being is, and establishing the connection of goodness to being. Without that, all talk about morality, all talk about shoulds is completely meaningless. It is nothing but opinion. It is nothing but subjective projection, and I don't care about that. So even Kant, whom I think his philosophy has a strong drive for moral ontology, because it is deontological, does not suffice. I would actually say I'm far closer in spirit to someone like Spinoza, and say someone like the Neo-Confucians, and probably Aristotle, but I haven't read my Aristotle, so in a long time. I've never really gone deep into his virtue ethics, and I don't know how, I'm sure at least Aristotle must have some link to ontology in his ethics.
yeah. Wait, real quick, whenever you copy pasted it into Discord, how'd you get those pluses? Do you manually add?
Manually did it.
Okay. That makes sense. Okay. Wait, so real quick, so for the deontology thing, the trolley problem, you wouldn't say you'd say flip the switch, right? Or
I would say the trolley problem is illegitimate. It's not a proper thought experiment at all.
why?
Because there are situations in which the details matter. So in the case, the trolley problem mainly is brought up is a quantity problem. And are there quantitative problems on a moral scale? Yes, there are. Usually that's not a problem that the individual is going to face. Usually that's a government problem, in which the government cannot actually care and take account of individuals. They have to take care of hundreds of millions, billions of people. So for them, a lot of things is we can't do things perfectly, but we can do things better. And so governments run very much on mostly consequentialist ideals. They're practical. They have to be. The individual person, however, is generally not faced with moral dilemmas of a numerical nature. The average person is usually faced with moral dilemmas which are actually of a qualitative nature. Like the difference between you have a trolley problem, and on one side is your mother, on the other side is your wife or whoever your lover is. Which do you choose? And is there some reason that you could give for your choice? Because there are plenty of times in which, by the way, not every event has a moral solution. That's just a fact. There are instances in which you cannot do right or wrong. You can only just act, and you'll have to deal with the consequences. Something like revolution, for example, like in a political revolution, like a civil war kind of situation, morality and ethics goes out the window. Because the very conditions of morality and ethics just don't exist anymore. In a war, you're in it to win it.
Okay.
So, as far as war, people go war crimes were committed, all this stuff. When is it that these things are established and, justice is acquired for them, if it's going to be acquired at all? When the states resettle and you have people becoming rational again, having communities in which, now we reestablish laws, and now we go back to the things that we did, and we reestablish a state of norms. But during the revolution itself, the whole idea of morality and ethicality just out the window.
But yeah, well, okay. I understand all of that. Like that makes sense. But so in that situation, you wouldn't think there's like a right answer. You would just have to do something and then face the consequence. Like assuming like obviously like in the Troy problem, like you're blind to all factors except like 5 and 1.
Yeah. So in those cases, like the reality is you got to bite the bullet because one, you can't sit back and do some kind of numerical calculus about the consequences. It's too chaotic. Even under regular circumstances, it like things are so chaotic that beyond a certain point, the calculations you can't say anything real about them.
Okay. So you say there's no right answer?
Yeah, so I would say like in something like a political revolution, like there is indeed no right answer.
What if it was like 1 in like a million? Would there still be no right answer?
Well, you can't say that. In the real world, you don't have a 1 in a million thing. You don't know, like for example, if you are the Bolsheviks, if you're Lenin and you put the Tsar to death, if you just jailed him at home, would he really cause much problems? The answer is yes. But for example, a lot of people make a lot of big deal of that, the fact that they killed Anastasia, which was like one of the princesses. Did she do anything? No. So was she morally responsible for what her parents did? No. Did she command any of the armies? No. So why did they put her to death? Well, they did it on, a whim. One, it's vengeance, absolutely. The other, which is not justified. But the other one is just a guess of like, well, this little girl could escape. She has friends abroad. She could, and people do, historically, go out, gather funds, gather, forces, and come back and try to fuck your shit up and try to get power again. Can they know that she's going to do that? No. Could they have like done what happened in the Disney movie in which, just put her in an orphanage, it turned into a regular like indoctrinated communist? Probably. But nobody knows that. And in the moment of chaos, there's neither right nor wrong, and the wrongs you only find out, and the rights you only find out in the future. Like in a trolley problem, you can have 5 people and one person. Well, if that one person is Albert Einstein, and you're back in the 1920s, if you say, if you decide that, unknowingly, that, you'll save 5 people, but you killed the guy who's like one of the key guys to develop modern physics. Did you do the right thing? Did you do the wrong thing? Well, based on the information that you had at the time, you thought you did the right thing. Objectively, did you do the right thing? Well, we still don't know.
Hey, what's up, white boy?
Oh, okay, I'm muting you.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I guess that's all I have. I can't really. I'll try going over this when I can. This is 7 pages. Calm down.
This is short compared to the actual argument.
Well,
we were literally almost done. Like, there's only 2 arguments left.
Yeah. I can see where it's going though. So I feel like there could be something like semantics inside, but I don't know. Do you have is there a longer version, like more detailed version?
Not in this format, but in essay formats, and it's more. It is more the straightforward argument of Hegel's philosophy.
And do you know where I'll be able to read that?
I can send you a text of it. I don't think you'll understand much of it, which is why I've made these set of arguments to talk to people here, because people don't know what Hegelianism is, so I'm not going to pretend and come here and talk, what to them is a bunch of gobbledygook. So these are arguments set up such that a regular person, who's rational enough and who's not like too weird and doesn't have like, subjective views of language in which they like, well, I don't define things that way because I define a car like a banana. Okay. So somebody who has regular intuitions can look at these arguments, a little bit, and see that I'm making a rational case for something that's actually intelligible and which is not too far from what they mean when they're talking about free will.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're not clinchers, and the very format of a formal argument can never be a clincher.
Is this the pro free will server or the pro or the anti free will?
Well, we were talking about pro free will, but we're almost done.
Yeah, well, I don't have anything else. I'll go over this whenever I can and see if I can
Do you
find
think
it.
is that your free choice? Are you making that choice freely and without coercion?
Well, no, I'm making that choice not freely.
Well, I would disagree, but
Well, you're in a simulation, so you're not really making any choices, so to speak.
There's not really any proof for the simulation, nor is there proof of the contrary.
Well, let's not go on that tangent. Well, you guys can go on that tangent after I leave. I'll be gone in just a little bit. But anyways, what do you think about this? Like, have you ever encountered anything like this? Because as far as I know, I never encountered anything like this when I was interested back when I was in college. And I've never encountered it ever.
Well, here's my thing, right? Like, I literally started getting into philosophy, like, a month ago. Like,
okay.
Yeah, so, like, I'm still young, and, like, I'm
Right.
still, like, in school. So, like, I was like, let me go into this. Mostly, it started off with, like, the God arguments, like, the simple stuff. Nihilism,
oh, yeah. I have a set of arguments like this for objective morality, by the way, and I have a set of arguments like this for God.
Oh, for God?
Yep.
And objective morality? Okay, well, can you just send the doxes for those? I mean, we're probably not gonna. Do you have doxes for those?
I have one for the objective morality. The one on God, I've just never written out, but I have the outline.
Oh, yeah. I'll see.
Yeah. By the way, where did you to our server if you want to?
Yeah, I
like,
joined it. Yeah.
Because the thing is, you won't find people who have something as extensive as I do, and like number of pages and number of arguments is not a sign of quality necessarily. But they won't talk about the ontology of this stuff. They'll just go directly and like, oh, free will, and I define free will this way. They won't ever ask the questions like, what is determinism? What is even the problem?
Yeah.
What is freedom really, and how does that make sense? And what is the will?
Yeah. Like,
it's a construct of the human mind, is what it is.
Yeah, I had to look up what a brute fact was while I was doing this. I had no idea of any of this. But yeah, argument for objective morality.
And I have videos, by the way. I don't know if you prefer listening or hearing.
Oh, you have videos?
Yeah.
And do you have like your YouTube somewhere?
Yep.
Is it in your bio?
Yeah, it's in my bio.
Okay. Nice.
Because I, unlike other people here, I actually study this stuff sincerely. Like, to me, this is not just like, oh, I'm just dicking around and making arguments and just having fun with people online. I wouldn't say I'm serious. I wouldn't say this stuff is serious, but it is sincere. So I have quite a lot that I've written. I have a whole blog post. I'm writing an encyclopedia. I got essays.
Oh, you have a work. Okay. Yeah, I see your Oh, that your blog on there? Okay.
Yeah, Empirical, and here are popular essays of mine.
Okay, that's cool. Wait, and for your arguments for God, are they like the ones that are repeated a lot, like the Kalam or contingency? They're completely different.
They are of a different nature. Yes, the closest thing they are is their ontological arguments, but they're not the typical ones that you find. And so far that I've talked to people here who actually take the time to listen, they've found it hard to disagree.
Okay, yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I'll probably start with the objective morality, because that seems way more interesting to me. And then I'll... Okay, that makes sense. That's fine. Alright, well, thanks for explaining all this for an hour.
No. Thanks for listening. Like that. Even if you don't end up agreeing, like that's not the point. Like the point isn't just like to beat it over your head and get you like just, I'm right. The point is to like understand different positions. I mean, that's it.
That makes sense. If I fully read it and like understand every single thing like completely, and then still can't like find a way around it, then I'll have to end up believing it, right?
Yeah.
But
If you're just beginning, you're probably going to find yourself on a roller coaster of believing and disbelieving things.
Yeah. Actually, I thought that too, but most of my philosophies, I think, since I was like 10, except like one, I've like stuck to. But we'll see.
Yeah. And a lot of things is, honestly, don't let yourself be confused by language. There is a very subtle distinction that most people don't catch between actually thinking about what people say and just taking their word for it. A lot of people here, well, yeah, I would say 99.999% of people here, which is virtually all of them except myself and the couple of people here, have an attitude in which they take words literally and they don't think about them. So the thing that I pointed out earlier to you about performative contradiction is a very big thing. It is very important that one begin to understand and catch on to those things, because you shouldn't. In an argument, the things in play are not only what the person has said, but what is actionable about what they have said. Not only in the practical sense of like I can physically do them or something like that, but also in the semantic sense that there is a meaning to things, and sometimes the meaning of things is contrary to the thing that is said.
Okay. Yeah. Oh yeah, that makes sense. And wait, for your proof of God that you have, does it like get to a personal being or just like a necessary being?
Nope, it is a personal being. And it's actually very quick. It's three arguments. One is there's a highest unity, which we already actually went over it on this one in one of the early arguments.
Yeah.
Second is there's a highest objectivity. And third, that objectivity has to be a subjectivity. And because there's a highest unity and that unity can only make itself, it has to be reflexive. So the process of self-making, in which like the thing makes parts within itself, that is what is called subjectivity, because the whole subjects the parts.
Okay.
So the universe is object and subject to itself, and so it is the process of self-making, and the process of self-making has to itself be part of its own internal process, such that the process of self-making is the process of self-making its own self-making. And this structure of a mirrored process within itself is the structure of what we would regularly call self-consciousness. The subjectivity, which is subjectively knowing of its own subjectivity, knowing here would just be the relationship of the coherence of itself. And that is what personality is. It is the subject that knows itself as subject. The universe is a subject that knows itself as subject. Therefore, God is a person.
What the fuck?
What?
You just started making things up.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, I don't have anything else. I mean, I have one thing, but it's very, very off topic. It's have you considered veganism?
Nope, but I do have an essay on veganism.
And what are your thoughts so far?
I think veganism is not a moral or ethical position. I think it is a position that is normative, but which is normative in the same way that aesthetics is normative. You ought to have good taste in art. You ought to like beautiful things. But if you don't like beautiful things, that does not make you an immoral or an unethical person. You ought to love animals. You ought to love freedom. But if you don't, you're not a bad person.
Yeah. Well, have you heard the name of the trade argument?
The what?
the name of the trait argument?
Trait. Not familiar.
If you
with it.
if you want, I could invite you to a server that's like specifically for this, or I don't know if you'd be interested because there's like these like one trick specific argument. Well, I can. It's like what's a trait that animals lack that if humans lack, you'd be familiar with. You'd be okay with killing humans.
No, those arguments are illegitimate.
Yeah.
Like
Or what?
those arguments are illegitimate. Like they're just a bad kind of argument. They're designed to get gotchas, but they're not really how we think. Like I linked to you on the side chat my video explaining all of this. So just as you see that I go from ontology, the structure of being, to the structure of like what is freedom is, and to the structure of what the will is. Likewise, I go from the structure of ontology to the structure of the good, to the structure of morality. Likewise, in this, I go from the structure of ontology to the structure of the human, to the structure of the animal. And then through that, we have a measure as to where these two relate to each other and how they relate to each other and how they can relate to each other. Okay. Such that it's not a singular trait that divides us or not. These are developing kinds. So there are points. So if you say like, oh, well, the trait that separates humans from animals is rationality, I assure you that person is going to answer, oh, well, then babies, should be treated just like animals and it should be fine to kill and eat babies. Well, no, that person is idiotic because they're treating the baby as if the baby is just a baby. Well, no, the baby is not just a baby. The baby is that which is going to grow and develop into an adult human being, which is rational.
Wait, but that's something else. So then you'd say that the trait isn't rationality, it's the potential to have rationality. But for example, if we hypothetically imagine someone who will never get the potential to be fully rational, or like more rational than an animal, like something
like somebody who's mentally handicapped. That
like
person, that person is still not an animal and not reducible to an animal. Guess what? Because they are of our kind, and kinds do matter. And so rather than talk about a singular trait, a kind is what I would call a self-generated body of traits.
Okay.
So just like
is it humanity?
Sorry, what?
So is a trait that being a human?
Yeah, it would be a generality of being a human, which involves more than just the immediacy of rationality.
Okay.
Such that,
go on.
Such that the human being, in this case, is the rational being. But abstract rationality is not what is meant by this. Here we not only have like an immediate quality, there are consequences to this quality which matter. So to be rational, for example, is to be the kind of being that can understand the distinctions and unities of the world and the distinctions and unities of themselves and the distinction and unity of themselves and the world and the distinction and unity of their own mind as containing the distinctions of all these other unities.
Okay. And if someone wasn't able to do that, you'd say, well, they're still a human, right?
Yes, because they are of our kind. So, like, we have an explanation in the kind that is a human being, because it is still a natural being, to a certain extent, that there will be failures. But obviously, we are the kind of animal which is a social kind of animal. We don't treat somebody who is just less smart than us, or rather we shouldn't, as suddenly an animal. Babies are not animals. Children, which are not smart enough, to be self-determining and judge things properly, are not animals. Even if somebody remains in a certain state, they are part of our communities. They come from us.
Okay. And for human, do you mean the morphology of a human, or the our chromosomes?
Everything, like the biological, the psychological, the cultural.
Okay. Oh yeah.
Yeah. The process of being human, if I may, like as in if you are having sex to have another human to beget the human species, you don't know if it's going to be mentally handicapped or functional, right? But it's not going to come out a dog. A dog is not going to come out of your wife, or at least you really hope not. That's the difference. That it still is a kind. It is still part of you as a self-generative process. So the human as a kind can self-generate itself, and so whatever is in that kind would be a part of it. And the process is the sex act, which of course leads to another human. It may be one that is deficient in the capacity for rationality, but it still is contained within being a human as a whole species. You can't get more generic than that yet, and that's the difference. I don't know if that helped or not, but
yeah, makes sense.
I mean, I can't really go like, I don't know how the dialogue tree works after this. I also just recently heard of this argument.
No, yeah. I'm aware what this argument is now that you've explained it. Yeah, I've seen it before. That kind of argument doesn't work here. It's an illegitimate form of argument. As a matter of fact, all these arguments that I presented to you are illegitimate forms of argument, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Wait, do you know Avi, Dr. Avi?
No.
Or Ask Yourself, or
I heard the name Ask Yourself. I've never watched or talked to anybody.
Yeah, they're analytics and they're morons. I've heard of them. I've seen them.
You've heard of? You think Avi's a moron?
Yeah, both of them.
Wait, what Avi that? Why Avi?
Avi is the Israel guy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're both just very formalistic. I don't think they engage with the conversation in a productive way.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. The way the name the trait usually works is you either it's like a sorting thing. You get someone who has a moral kind of framework that's inconsistent, or you get someone that has to accept certain things. If theoretically your only reason was someone that's rational, well then, or has the potential to be rational, then you'd be okay with for example killing a mentally disabled person, and then someone would have to bite the bullet on that, or say no I wouldn't, and then be with a contradiction. But I don't know where the dialogue goes after this, so I can't really. Yeah. Would you ever be interested in talking to any of one of them?
No, God, no. I don't talk to idiots. I'm sorry, but those people are beneath me, and I have better things to do. I mean, I come to this server mainly to kick the shit. And occasionally I want to test these arguments out, just to see what the responses will be. Just because I want to write these to present not to philosophy students and philosophers. I don't give a damn about them. Those people are hopeless, by and large. The whole industry, which it is an industry, strange to say, but it is an industry of who knows who. In a popularity contest. I don't care about those people. They're not doing philosophy. They're not engaged in seeking the truth. So, I mean, if you ever want to engage...
they're basically saying that the reason we don't eat people is because of morality. Fucking dumb.
The reason we don't eat people is because of morality?
That's the argument. And I'm sorry, the reason we don't eat people isn't morality. So, it's a complete non-starter. I don't want to have the dialogue tree. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
It's an interesting idea, but it has flawed presuppositions.
Well, it wouldn't be that we don't eat people because of morality. It would be that we don't find it bad to eat people. But the fact that we find it bad to do one and not bad to do the other will show that there's a difference between them. It's not that morality is the only thing stopping us from eating humans, obviously.
Yeah. But again, that's based on a flawed set of, or flawed form of argumentation, which is fundamentally illegitimate because of its presuppositional status. Not only are these people presupposing the things that they're asking, because in a question is baked in the form of the answer.
Yeah, I'm assuming you mean by presupposing that there's a specific trait, right?
No, it's for example, the usual person presenting and the usual person attacking, in both cases, is presupposing something. They're presupposing ontology, they're presupposing epistemology, they're presupposing a whole lot of things. And ultimately, all of them are presupposing that they know what reason actually is, and they actually don't. And so they think that they're engaging in something rational when they're actually not. So, as far as the gotchas, if you play into the game, yeah, you're going to fall into the gotcha because There's no way if it's like going to be in the format that they want it. It's answering yes or no questions. It's answering like, give me a definition here and now and give me a complete definition. There can be no room for generative explanations of any kind. So, even somebody like me who knows exactly how this works will be caught off, on the back foot, because the format is designed to cage you no matter what. And it has nothing to do with the validity of your content. It has everything to do with the format is itself made to cage somebody in impossible double binds.
And if you make your point, they won't acknowledge it.
Yeah, if you try to like break out of the dialogue tree, they'll just say like, "Oh, that you're dodging the question, that you're not understanding," and they won't listen to you. And if I were you, honestly, I would not engage with people like that.
Mm.
I would invite you to my server. Well, we've already invited you to the server. We actually do this stuff over there. We're not dicking around. It's not. I wouldn't say it's serious. I would say it's sincere. And if you wanted to get a good basis of something actually sensible and rational, I would invite you to, perhaps join me one of these days, and I will introduce you to Chinese philosophy. I think Chinese philosophy is some of the best shit ever. Like as far as like ontology and ethics goes. It is highly intuitive. It is highly rational. But you do need somebody to guide you through it to start making some sense of it, especially when you're just beginning.
Like there's no book I can just read, and that's like I got it.
Yeah, no, I don't have notes on that. I have a book on that, but you definitely need a guide for that, because I read it, but by the time I read it, I already have a background in how to think, so I could recognize good thinking when it's there. And the person doesn't have to like go step by step by step in excruciating detail to explain everything to me. I can think things through and link things by myself. These works in Chinese philosophy, like they're ancient, and they were written with the purpose of being things that you read them, you went to the teacher and you asked them, can you explain this? Why'd you say this? Why'd you write this? So they're not...
Yeah, it's top-down metaphysics. If you don't know top-down metaphysics, it's going to be really hard to follow.
Yeah, it is really hard to follow. Like if I had read that, 6 years ago, I probably would have thought it was like garbage.
Okay, I have nothing else.
Yeah, but it is similar to the kind of stuff that I sent you in the ascending arguments for morality. They start with ontology. From the ontology, you can see how the ethics and morality come about.
Okay, and is the Hegel guy a Chinese philosopher, or is it like a modern age?
Modern, 1800s.
Okay. Wow.
German. I don't suggest you start with him. The only thing
he's
you
called
should
the
probably
German
start
idealist,
with,
right?
Yeah, German idealist. I don't suggest you start with him. You probably should start with more typical things. Hit up some Descartes and whatnot. The only thing I would suggest with that, and you can just talk to us about it if you have questions, if you want to know about it. There are skeptical things that Hegel will bring up that no other philosophy generally does. So that all these people that you're talking to, they could not answer the things that Hegel's going to ask.
And are they ontological questions?
They're logical. So Hegel shows that epistemology is a complete waste of time, that ontology generally is a complete waste of time, and that the issue of philosophy, the issue of all understanding, is actually an issue of what the hell are we talking about? Do the things that we say actually have meaning? What do they mean? And can we prove that they mean what we say they mean?
Yeah. Wait, so by waste of time, do you mean is it because we're presupposing it? Presupposing...
waste of time in the case that you're literally wasting your time. You could be learning real knowledge, or you can be learning fake knowledge, which isn't knowledge at all. All this stuff is fake knowledge. The guys with the vegan server and those kinds of arguments is just fake knowledge.
Well, they do have empirical arguments too, so
No.
it's not all fake knowledge.
Now, even the empirical stuff is especially fake knowledge.
No, I mean like climate and stuff like that.
No, even that is especially fake knowledge. As a matter of fact, it doesn't even. Well, yeah, it is fake knowledge. It does not count as knowledge at all. There's something that Hegel mentions, and it's a very important distinction. There is correctness and there is truth. So, for example, I can make up a game and I can tell you the rules. And then, we can play this game. And if there's any dispute, you're like, wait, hold on, rule X says this. And we go to the written rules and we're like, well, it either says what it says or not. And it's assuming that the rule is clear. And then you would say, well, you're correct. It is correct that the rule is such and such that, when you make this move in the game, something happens specifically. But Hegel would say these things do not belong to truth. These things themselves are not true. They're fictions. The games exist only because we say they exist and because we play them. They're not real things in the world themselves. They're not objects proper. A lot of stuff in climate science, for example, is not objects proper. There are things that people decided that they thought were important, like people decided that CO2 is the most significant marker in climate science. How they did that is, well, because it's the easiest that we have access to. But is the climate merely determined by CO2? Well, no, actually it isn't. There's a whole lot of things going on in the planet, both inside and outside, that affect climate, not just CO2. CO2 is just a marker that we choose and we privilege. But there's no good reason to think that that is like the determining factor. We just say that it is. But just say,
I don't think we think it's the most. I don't think we think it's the determining factor. We just probably say it's an important factor. And we know there's a causal relationship between CO2 levels and.
Well, sure. There's a causal relationship between CO2. There's a causal relationship even stronger between water vapor in the atmosphere, which does more for heating than CO2 does. There's a causal relationship to sunspots. People aren't aware of that. There's a causal relationship to some generally unstudied and unknown electrical environment between us and the sun. There are literally these dark mode plasma ropes, they call them quote-unquote magnetic ropes, going directly from the sun to the earth. And these things are huge. They're the size, like when they touch down, they're the size of cities. Like modern cities, like mega cities. They're not tiny. And they're transferring energy between the earth and the sun. Nobody's looking into like what's going on with that. What's that doing? There's a huge relationship between grasslands and grazing animals and the amount of carbon sequestration in the soil. There are many things that are going on. The fact that people have chosen CO2 as the privileged thing that it's the number one thing we need to reduce is the most asinine and stupid thing one could think of.
Do you think we'll be able to target or stop sunspots?
No. But even if you target and stop CO2, it's not the main determinant. Like the fact, like that's why I say, like we've chosen that as to be like a major cause. Is it actually a major cause? Well, it's the one thing that we can easily see. There's a whole cycle. It is now a well-known cycle. There's a carbon cycle. There's a water cycle. For example, as the oceans warm, they release more CO2. The warmer it gets, the more water vapor there is in the atmosphere, which keeps warming up things, which keeps warming the ocean, which releases more CO2. What kicks that off? It's not necessarily CO2. There's also underwater volcanism ongoing, which people don't think about, in which, recently there's been an increase in volcanic activity. That is warming up the underwater, the bottoms of the oceans, which warms up to the top of the oceans, which means more CO2 released. It's a vicious cycle.
This is a problem of magnitude, right? Like how much would come from that versus how much are made via, we can say, emissions that we can control.
Yeah. And so the issue is that the issue is not like, is carbon like really a factor? I'm sure that it is. I'm not going to dispute that. The issue is, for me, that politically this has become a dividing line that is completely irrational, where people think we just need to get rid of CO2, that's it. They're not paying attention to the fact that desertification is a huge factor ongoing that we are ignoring. You know, the only places in the world actively fighting desertification are Africa and China, and it's a huge deal. And part of the reason that desertification has happened is because we killed the natural wildlife, the roaming animals and herds, which would go to the grasslands and, you know, silvopastures, you know, semi-forested pastures, eat the grass, urinate, trample, you know, move the soil, defecate, and create the nutrient cycle for these grasslands. Without the mass herds, these grasslands are literally just oxidifying. They don't die in a consumption cycle, rather they die through oxidation, which is bad, because then the next year, grass underneath can't grow because the dead grass is still there, and that dead grass is not decomposing properly. It's causing more carbon to be released than if it was eaten by an animal, and then this leads to poorer and poorer soil conditions, which leads to desertification, the spread of deserts. This is a huge deal. Nobody's talking about it. Only one fucking guy from South Africa is talking about it. He refound out how to reverse it quickly. Really quickly. Amazing. His name is, what's his name? Alan Savory, I think. You should watch his videos. It's incredible. Okay. And nobody's doing anything about that. In the US, nobody cares. Central America, nobody cares. South America, nobody cares. Most countries, he's tried to like go and spread this knowledge wherever he can. Most countries, they give him a little bit NGO money, but they never make it into a big program. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about the desertification problem, and it is a huge problem. It is actually more immediate to us than the fucking weather is.
Yeah, I mean, that's cool. I'll look into it. Do you have
you should look into it.
Does Hegel have like any philosophies that relate to like physics?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, tomorrow morning on my channel will be a video with a discussion I had with somebody, in which half of it is about physics stuff.